Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Turnstile Tours online virtual program. My name is Brian Hoffman. I'm a tour guide and virtual program presenter here at Turnstile Tours. Thank you all so much for joining us today. As some of you may know, we are getting ready to relaunch our in-person food cart tours, which we've done for many years. We're relaunching them next month. So we're very excited to share those stories of and the food of the food vendors in person with you guys. And so in celebration of that, we've been doing some street vending programs, including the one today. Today we'll be learning about food carts, but kind of from a different angle. We'll be focusing on the visual side of them. And we'll be talking with photographer and filmmaker Maxwell Schiano, who'll be joining us in a little bit to share his stories and photos from his zine, New York City Vibe. And proceeds from his zine and from this program as well are going to the Street Vendor Project. We have a special guest towards the end, Carina Kauffman-Gutierrez, who will tell us a little bit more about their work, if you're not familiar with them. Enough with that, let's get right to the program, and I'd love to introduce Maxwell Schiano.
Hey everyone, how you doing? Thanks for having me, Brian.
Thank you so much.
Tours and everything. Super excited about this.
Thank you so much, and we've been super excited about your zine and your beautiful photographs of street vendors. It sort of brings a whole new light to it for many, and certainly I think a lot of these food carts that many people walk by all the time and don't really stop and pay attention to. You really captured
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah. So before we get to some of the photos, tell us a little bit about your background. You're both a filmmaker and an editor and a photographer. How did you get involved in the visual arts to begin with?
So I started my career in filmmaking, really, and I was working as like a director and doing a lot of music videos and fashion stuff. And then, found my way into working as a video editor. And I was doing stuff for commercials. I was doing stuff for HBO, editing their like highlight reels that were going on the on-demand menus. And I really loved that. But I found myself in a place where I just couldn't get the full creative expression that I wanted to get out. And it just was feeling like a job. And I really wanted it to be, a mix of like a passion and something that I could really go all out with. And when social media came about, what I started doing is I started sharing my photographs that were like kind of visual notes for my films and just like inspiration for just my filmmaking in general, and what happened was people just started responding to these photos and just kind of like encouraged me to keep pursuing my photography. And at that time I was taking most of my photos on my phone, and then I started doing some street photography with my phone, and then it kind of just blew up from there. People really loved what I was doing. When I originally started it, I would take photographs of the city and link it up to a specific movie that it looked like. So people loved the street photography, they loved the movie knowledge as well. And then it just kind of gone off from there. So I got a job offer from this magazine in the UK to be their social media person and their video and photo person and social media. So I took that job, and it was just kind of like a very new thing at the time, and kind of just propelled me into this different mode of work and mode of creativity, and kind of doing all these things that I do together. And then from there, I got scouted to work with Red Bull. And I think it's been like 2 or 3 years since I left that job that I was working full time. And now I kind of taking all these things that I was doing together and kind of, working as a freelancer and kind of covering all that ground. But my true love is doing the street photography and creating projects like this one with the zine and capturing cards.
Yeah. Well, we've got a photo of you with your camera in Coney Island. So you're from New York originally, right?
Born in Long Island. Yep.
Okay, well, it's New York. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Just some people would argue with that, but yeah.
um, but I'm sure you grew up coming to the city and spending time on the street quite a bit.
Yeah, so like my family, I from Long Island, but we moved around a lot growing up. But like New York was always the one constant. So like we'd always come here for every holiday to see family in Long Island. We'd come into the city, we'd skateboard and skateboard the Brooklyn Banks and like just always come in the city and it's funny because like I'd go in the city with my dad and we'd have like this routine of like getting a pizza and then just like walking around and seeing all like the vendors, and he'd always be like, "Oh, I'll buy you one of these fake Rolex watches." And I don't know, just like this routine, but it's just New York was like the one constant. And like, we moved around so much growing up that like, always felt like a fish out of water. And I didn't really like connect with like why I was feeling like that until like I finally moved back to New York, where I was just like, okay, this is definitely home.
Yeah. Well, before we get into the some of the photos and talk more about how you started this project, there's a video I wanted to share, just a clip of it, and we can drop in the link for everyone to watch the whole thing.
Okay.
Because we don't often see photographers taking the photos, so I thought this was kind of neat to see you out there. And obviously, you're wearing a mask, so we'll talk about some of this happened during COVID. This
Yeah.
project.
There is photographers that inspire me to go out and shoot. I think I'm inspired by the drive that people have with learning, because I'm constantly learning myself. When it comes to specific photographers, I actually think that it's not really about names, it's really about an idea for me. I think I follow a lot of Facebook groups that showcase New York City photographs from the past. A lot of the work there is not necessarily from photographers. They're sharing their archived photos. To me, that inspires me the most. It's not necessarily about creating the most beautiful photograph. Like, I want to find the intersection between beauty, realness, and documenting the city for future generations to come. I'm just trying to capture life as it is.
I think that really speaks to what you do here. So before you necessarily got into the photographing street vendors, you were doing street photography, right?
Yeah.
So how did you sort of I don't know, we've got 3 photographs that I know you've shared from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's a big question. Like what inspires you? Do you just take photos, or you just kind of wander around and see what?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really like all centers around the idea of just like my real love of New York. I mean, I think I just truly love the city, and I think that comes through with the work that I photograph on the street. I think it's something that's a constant evolution. Like I don't know what I want to capture. I just know that I want to capture New York, and like like I said, like hold that for like future generations to come. And like, it's not always about taking a beautiful photograph, but, showing the city how it was in this time. And I think, there's something really important about that, like beyond taking beautiful photographs, just documenting. And, yeah, I think that's what it is. I think it's also like a subconscious thing that like, I can't really explain that, like, photography is a form of like meditation for me. So it's something that like calms my mind, especially when, working as a freelancer. It gives me like this break to leave my desk and like walk around and ease my mind and just like take in the sights. And it gives me a different sense of like observation. Like I see the city differently when I'm taking photos, because usually, you're running from place to place in the city and everything is so fast paced. But like, most of the time when I photograph, like I'm walking. So it's like I walk, everywhere. I walk from uptown to downtown, and I'm just kind of like taking it in, and I'm just waiting for these moments. And, sometimes I go and take photos and I don't take any photographs. It's just me about like, it's just the mentality of like putting myself in that mindset of being more observational and present in the city. And, you know, appreciating it. So I think it's like, I don't really know 100% why. It's just like, you know, it's like when you see a photo like this that I got, I was standing on this corner, and this guy that I was hanging out with, like doing a little photo walk with, he walked into the restaurant to go to the bathroom, and I'm just standing there, and this car pulls up, and it's like within a minute, this car pulls up, and this family starts to get out of the car, and like the two kids walk out, and the other kid puts his arm around his shoulder, and he goes, points up at the Empire State Building, and it was like almost perfect. And I like everything was like right in that moment, and I literally just like picked my camera up and took the photo. So it's like, it's funny. Sometimes you go, oh, sorry, I think you're
Oh, no, I was saying you had to be there like for that quick moment.
yeah.
I mean,
And I think that's like, you know, a lot of the photography that I have, it's really just about like being there in that moment and being present. And, you know, that's what I try with my photos. Like, I don't want to like over beautify. I don't want to like, you know, obviously like my photography shows like, you know, like that I love New York City, but I don't want to like over romance. I want to show it like as it is, and be truthful with the work. So, you know, moments like these are like amazing because it just happened like right in front of me. And you know.
yeah. It's funny. And of course, it was the Empire State Building, but it also feels like he was pointing at Superman up in the sky.
Yeah. So
That's
this is another funny moment. So I was kind of like in another world, like just spacing out for a second. I was loading my camera with film, and I just like stood on the street in this moment. And as soon as I stopped loading the film, I saw the guy was staring at me to see like what I was doing. And I looked right over, and I was like, oh my God, that's such a perfect photograph. And right when I put the camera up, he moved the newspaper in front of his face. And it was just like, I don't know, it's just like a perfect moment. It just like, everyone that walks through New York City and you get these glimpses from the doorman, like, I don't know, it's just a classic New York vibe where you just like feel like you're moving around the city. And I love, like, if you look closely at the newspaper, where it's kind of like an extra bonus, the headline says "Hanging in Suspense." So it's just like,
wow.
yeah, I don't know, just very magical moment there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we have another beautiful photo of the 59th Street Bridge here. Which, when I lived in Queens, this was my
Yeah,
way
I
home.
mean, I love the 59th Street Bridge, probably my favorite. I mean, definitely a fan of the Brooklyn Bridge. I love driving over the George Washington Bridge when you come into the city. I think that's a really nice feeling. But I don't know. I've lived in this area on the Upper East Side for about like 14 going on 15 years now. And like, I don't know, every time I make that walk like towards the water, it just gives you like that sense of peace that, you know, and I feel like this kind of like, I feel like I really like captured that feeling that I get personally, like just like, you know, escaping the brief like chaos of the city for like these you know, beautiful sights that exist here.
So let's talk about street vendors, because this led into your zine and your project, specifically photographing street vendors. Now, how did you come up with this idea for doing that? What was sort of the impetus?
So like a former colleague of mine that I used to work with at Red Bull, Julian Brimmers, he basically, we've been talking about working together for a long time about making some type of publication. I have this idea that's like kind of on the back burner that I'm going to be working on as a book. But so he freelances for Kickstarter, and he gave me this idea that they were doing this special thing during, I think it was in January, which is like called Make 100. And you make 100 editions of something. And he was like, you should make a zine of your work and just kind of like get out there. And like, at the time, like, you know, I was like making a transition from working full time and kind of being a little like exhausted and kind of like regrouping myself and, you know, figuring out how to exist as a freelancer and, you know, kind of just getting all my things in order at that time. But like his his push like really helped me because, you know, just like sometimes you need that like external observer to say like, you're good enough, you know, you should do this. Like you got to just try, you know? So like he suggested that I do that. So I was like, okay. So I had this idea in the back of my head and I didn't know exactly what it was going to be. Like, it's just going to be, you know, a collection of all these, you know, street photography that I do in New York and stuff like that. And I didn't know. So then this night happened and it was like, I think it was like 3 o'clock in the morning and I was in like the worst mood ever because my computer was totally busted and I was like in the middle of doing some work. And so this is right outside the Fifth Avenue Apple store. And I was like,
just 24 hours for those that don't know.
Yeah, 24 hours. So I was super annoyed in like the worst mood. I was like, I can't even believe this. And I walk out of the door and like, this is the site that's there. And I was just like, there was just something like so heavenly about it. It just like, I don't know, like when you walk around New York City, like in the dead of night at like 3, 4 a.m., like it's such a magical thing to see because you see all these like the city working that like is happening, all these things that are happening while everybody's sleeping. And it's like, you understand why, you know, how everything exists, like how, you know, what people need to do to make all the things happen in the city. And I don't know, I just thought it was like a beautiful representation of New York. Like I remember just like taking that photo and sharing it on Instagram immediately with the caption, "The heart of New York sells hot dogs on the street at 3 a.m." And it just like, I don't know, it just came to me. And I just like, everybody, like, it just like, people really loved it on Instagram. A bunch of people like sent me a message like, oh, like, I really love that. It's like such a heartfelt thing to the city and stuff like that. And since that moment, I just kind of like, you know, kept seeing the food carts in my mind. And I realized, like, even looking back at my photos, like how many food carts that I was photographing just subconsciously.
Oh, interesting.
And, you know, it just came to me. Like, I was like, okay, this is the idea. I'm going to do a food cart zine. You know, this is something that is so synonymous to New York City, but like, you know, isn't as like recognized as like a yellow cab or like all the landmarks or anything like that. So I was like, you know, this is something that like we should celebrate. You know, these guys are these people are out there like every day doing it, rain, snow, like, you know, hustling. It just really feels like New York City. And so that's where the idea came about. And I just kind of like ran with it since then. And you know, yeah.
Yeah, I love these night photos, and there's a few of them, obviously. I think you mentioned heavenly, like to me, it looks like there's a halo around it. And unlike oftentimes during the day where there's so much madness around the food carts that they sort of get lost, you know, in some ways in the shuffle of New York, here it feels like this is the star of New York, you know, which I think is pretty profound.
Yeah, they're like spotlights, you know what I mean? Especially when in the dark you see them, like they're like a beacon of light, you know?
Yeah. And there's comfort in there as well, at least for me, you know, in New York, knowing that, you know, that there's people out and about, and
Yeah.
food I can get if I want. And now, before this project, did you know much about street vendors? I mean, in terms of like their day-to-day life, what was your experience with vendors prior to this?
No, I mean, I just appreciated them as like, you know, a facet of New York City. My father, he's a true Brooklyn boy, and he's like obsessed with soubrette. So like, it's so funny. He doesn't live in New York now, but like every time he comes to visit, he's like, I got to get a hot dog. Like, and it's just funny. My dad loves it. So, and the best part about it is when I did the event, when I released the zine, so Brett sponsored the event and gave the hot dogs, but the best part was they gave me a bunch of like shirts and t-shirts, and they gave an umbrella, and I gave it all to my dad, and he was like losing it. It was like the
Oh, wow.
best gift I ever gave him.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Um, and so tell us about the process here. Did you, I guess you picked certain days to kind of go out and uh, photograph? Did you pick specific neighborhoods? Did you scout them before? Or
So basically, that's what I had planned. Like what I did, when I first came up with the idea, basically I was kind of like, you know, testing the waters and just kind of like, basically photographing all the places that like I would be, and kind of like just seeing how, what's the variety of photos that I can get? How does this gonna look in a publication, and just kind of like feeling it out. Like I I have this like, I really want to like photograph a neighborhood like authentically. Like that's why I think a lot of the photographs are like very close to where I live, because I feel like I know this area, like I feel this area, and I feel like, I want to show it like how it is. So like what happened is I had this whole plan of all these neighborhoods mapped out. I was going to do some like more editorial content with like taking portraits of some of the vendors and kind of doing some interviews. And I spoke to Carina from the Street Vendor Project about that. But then the pandemic happened, and I wasn't able to do any of those plans. And I was like super bummed about that. So basically what happened is I had these collection of photos that I had shot, like that were, these locations that were like near my apartment and some downtown, and like all the areas that I just am already going for, working, and all these other, all these other things that I have to do. So I wasn't, for this zine, I wasn't able to do like the full 5-borough representation, because my plan got cut short. So like when that happened, there was this, basically I put everything on pause. I was like, well, I don't know how I feel about this. I want to, make sure the representation is there. I want to show, the variety of cultures and the variety of spaces. And I was a little like depressed about it, like I was going through the pandemic. That's another thing that we were all going through. But and the Kickstarter like had already finished, and I was in this weird place of like, I don't know what to do. You know what I mean? And so like after like a month or two went by, my twin brother just suggested to me, he was like, you have so many photographs, like you should just see what you can make from that. And like he was like, I think you can make something like beautiful from that, from what you have. I was like, why not? So I reached out to this designer, Paul Raffaelli, who does Love Injection in New York, which is like a music fanzine. And I said, why not? So like I sent him the collection of photos, which is like actually a significant amount of stuff. And we just started working on it. It's kind of like the one thing that really propelled me and kept me like in like that really positive outlook during the pandemic, that like, I don't know, just kept me moving, and like working on something. And that's basically what happened. We produced it through the pandemic, and then finally finished it. And then we came together to do the zine release. What I did was I bought out a food cart for like a couple hours, and Sabret supplied the hot dogs, and Carina from the Street Vendor Project came, and she was there like sharing all the information from SVP. And also one of my favorites, we got Nuts for Nuts to come by, and people got free hot dogs and free nuts for nuts. And it was just like, it felt perfect, because it was like in the wintertime in the slush, and like, you know what I mean? Like, not, you would tell people in like middle America about that, they'd be like, why would people go hang outside by Central Park, standing in the slush, eating hot dogs and nuts? And it's like, I don't know, to me, it was just like a perfect representation of like what we were celebrating. And, the whole idea.
Yeah, totally. Let's go back one slide. There's some things that I just noticed, and I don't know if you have any stories about any of these photos, but like to me, I just love how this is standing right alongside these tall buildings, and it just to me feels like such a permanent fixture of
Mhm.
New York. It kind of it feels so tall too.
I think like, with all my photos, like I think one of the biggest things is like setting. So like it's like I feel the setting is as much a character as like what I'm photographing. So I think if you look at all my photos, you see that like it's not just the food cart, but it's the fabric of the city that's around it and the people that are around it, and just trying to capture that full perspective. Like you feel like you're on the street looking at it.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And let's go forward one or two. I also there's of course some of the carts we recognize the brands, the name, the Nathan's, the
Mhm.
Sabrette. Um, so that's certainly familiar. And then I think the next one here is the famous halal guys,
Yep.
which I guess has become known across the country and the world now that they've opened up storefronts. But for New Yorkers, even if you don't see the name, those yellow shirts, that in the middle of the
Yeah.
night pops and
Yeah.
uh,
I mean, I remember when they had the one cart and there was the line like all the way around the street. So yeah.
was this photo during the pandemic?
This was basically like right at the start. Like it was like right when they told us like it was kind of imminent. Uh I think it was actually like 2 or 3 days before our lockdown happened.
Hmm.
Or no. Maybe like a week before the lockdown happened.
Because it is very unusual, certainly before COVID, to see no line at this at this
Oh yeah, this
particular
was like
vendor.
basically it was super barren at this time. I remember that's when people kind of started to, you know, be cautious and not be out. So there's
Yeah,
I have a lot of these moments where it's kind of like these empty spaces in New York.
yeah. Why don't we go to the next photo here? I also love the movement around the carts, and
Hmm.
and like this gentleman that is clearly not paying any attention at all to the vendor and the cart, and it just that sort of story there, sort of maybe juxtaposition between.
Yeah, I mean when I posted this on Instagram, I posted with the caption "A Tale of Two Cities," and I
Mhm.
just feel like that really kind of like you feel like the different weight of like the different stories, and like especially the way that the vendor is kind of looking at me, and like you don't know if he's looking at me or he's looking at the guy over there. um yeah, it just feels like you feel uh I think it really like encapsulates like this 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 vibe of like when you walk around the city, you just constantly have this thought in your head like, who are these people and like what is their story, like what are they doing, like especially like if you're walking around in the middle of the day, you're like, what are these people doing, like like there's so many people out there in the middle of the day. But this one in particular, I think it really just shows the difference of life. I mean, you see that like two people, you know obviously working, but like it's different, like different mode of life and struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and yeah, and some of these next photos, you see the vendor, because some of the photos are of the cart itself or the movement around it, but
Hmm.
of course, as we were just talking about, the people working and uh, going here. I also find your photos, certainly they capture a very specific time, but there's also something timeless about these. And I don't know enough about photography, if that's in terms of the type of camera you're using, the type of film
Yeah.
you're using, but there's also sort of a 1970s era New York feel to the
Hmm.
photos as well.
I mean, I think it's two things. I mean, one, obviously, like now film photography is a big part of my process. So like, obviously those color palettes are like some of those are kind of based on some of the stuff from those time periods. So that's why it's kind of going to look like that in a way. But also it's like, you know, that's a big inspiration for me. It's like, I really love looking at photos from the past in New York City. And like, I really want to show like this, like where you can look at it in two ways, where like, you could be like, okay, this is just a snapshot that someone took, you know, like of their family. And like, maybe they just missed the focus on their family and it just the focus was on the food cart. Or you could say like, oh, this, okay, I understand the like the photographic eye behind this. Whereas like, you know, like my thinking is that like I really love photographing like the chaos of New York. Like to me, this is like one of my favorite type of scenes that I like to capture, where it's like you get in the foreground like this like non-symmetrical people walking by, and it just feels kind of crowded in a way where like what you feel like you're in the middle of like a ton of people crossing the street. So I think that like you see those two perspectives, but like, you know, yeah, obviously the film photography plays a role in kind of like making things feel like that. And then also just my inspiration from, you know, photos of New York from the past.
Yeah, and this, I mean, this certainly speaks to that, where it feels like it's from the past, but clearly it's of a specific time, seeing everyone wearing these masks. And was this in the middle of the pandemic? Do you have a sense of when this?
This is maybe a couple months ago, actually. Yeah, I think this is like basically not long before they like lifted the mask mandate in New York. Yeah, so this is like when things were kind of starting to get a little bit busier, and yeah, obviously you could see like, you know, the food cart isn't getting that much love and all the people are walking by, you know.
Yeah, you just see him like eagerly awaiting for a, or maybe he's sort of, I don't know, sort of surrendered in some way that business isn't going to be good today. It's hard to read that, but
Yeah.
he is certainly the most compelling part of the photo to me, the vendor.
I'll tell you, like, one of my favorite things is that, like, you know, when you see, even when a like a street vendor is like not doing well, like a lot of the time they're like, they look like they're having a good time. And like, even like this moment, you know, if you could interpret it in many ways. Yeah, obviously it looks kind of like, you know, he's taking a pause or looking a little like distressed about the day. But like the one thing I like, they just, you know, when you see someone like grilling, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it really like encapsulates that vibe when you walk around and you see the vendors, like they really do look like they're like having a good time, or they have a good spirit about themselves. Like that's the perfect example, which is like, you know, yeah, I love that photo.
Yeah. Did you chat with any of these vendors as you were going, or order food?
This guy in particular, I asked him for if I could take his photograph, and then that was his immediate reaction. And it was like a perfect quick moment, and that was it, you know?
Yeah.
I most of the time I don't. Like, there's select times where, like, you know, I get a little bit closer and I speak to them, and I, you know, can I take your photo? I'll you know, I'll send it to you afterwards. But most of the time I like to like be like an observer and not really like, you know, affect the things that I'm photographing. So I like to just like photograph it as it is, you know. A lot of times, like, I have shown some of the photographs to the vendors that I've taken afterwards, and like, you know, the vendor that we had the event at, like, it was nice to see when they were going through the zine. He was like, oh, like that's me. And like, he was like seeing all the photos with him in it. And then the other guy that was like running the 3 carts in the area was like, oh, this is my cart. This is my, like, he was going through it was like, it was nice to see that, you know?
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So, and you decided that proceeds from the zine were going to go towards the street vendor project. Now, were you familiar with them prior? And in just a minute, we're going to bring on Carina to tell us about the street vendor project. But how did you come to learn about them?
Well, one thing is I knew that, like, you know, with this project in general, like I wanted to be, you know, I wanted to give back to the city. I don't want it to be about myself. I want it to be about New York and like what I'm photographing, and really celebrate and give back to that. And like, you know, when the idea with the, you know, food card zine came about, I just thought, you know, like I really want this thing to be for positive, and also some type of like education that like we can use to you know, do better, like help, you know, support these things and preserve uh the New York that we know and love, you know. And that's when I, you know, was doing some research and found the Street Vendor Project, and reached out to Carina.
Yeah, well, so and for those that don't know, we've worked very closely with the Street Vendor Project as well. And Carina, proceeds from our in-person tours go to the Street Vendor Project, as does this program. It was a free program, but we certainly have recommended a donation to them. If you want to donate and you haven't, or you want to donate more, we're going to drop the link at streetvendor.org/ I think donate, but we will drop the link into the chat box here. But yeah, I'd love to bring on Carina Kauffman-Gutierrez from the Street Vendor Project, who's going to join us to talk a little bit about their work and about how Max sort of came to them, and how this synergy has worked together. So hi, Carina, good to see you.
Hey, Carina.
Hi, see you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. And Max, thank you for sharing. It was fascinating to hear again, like more about your process, how you know, you're just walking through New York City and you don't even realize, right? The street vendors are on every corner. They're out there serving food, chatting it up with everyone. But then when you start to really look into it, right, and understand who these people are, who are street vendors, it's a whole new world.
For sure. No, I was just saying, like, you know, when you tell someone to like picture New York City, like you picture a block, you see like a yellow cab and a street vendor, you know, I mean, it's like, it's there, you know?
So Carina, for those that don't know what the Street Vendor Project does, could you just give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a membership-driven organization of about 2,000 street vendors who sell food and merchandise from the streets and sidewalks all across the 5 boroughs. And so as an organization, we do a mix of, you know, direct legal services to support vendors, and also to uplift and change policies that have been created to unfortunately make it so that these iconic members of our communities, right, struggle so much to survive. And so on the day-to-day, we can be doing anything from holding a meeting in a commissary kitchen where vendors go every night to park their carts, to doing street outreach to educate people on their rights, to lobbying meetings with elected officials to, you know, share what's happening in the streets, how they can support vendors to just exist, right? To be able to run their businesses, have business licensing, have access to resources, and be recognized for how they contribute to New York City as well.
And I know recently you guys were up in the Bronx doing a rally up there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, as vendors have been trying to make it through the pandemic, as we all have, right? Unfortunately, vendors themselves, as primarily cash economy businesses, or as folks who, you know, have limited English, limited digital literacy, have been really excluded from most of the relief that's out there. For small businesses, as well as just for New Yorkers in general, right? And so it's been very, very difficult for folks to survive this past year. And as the city reopens, right, we all have this sense of hope that things will go back to normal, that things will, you know, settle down. We can go back to meeting up with friends, enjoying food, different things like that. But unfortunately for street vendors, going back to normal is actually, it's going back to a system that criminalizes and penalizes them just for trying to survive, right? And for contributing and running a small business. And so what we're seeing now is that as the city reopens, that's meant to return to enforcement. And that's meant a return to heavy fines being levied on street vendors. For folks who don't live and breathe the street vending world, it can be a very strange web of legal systems that make it so that vendors can't access the necessary permitting and licensing that they need, because there's been a cap placed on it since the 1980s. And if you don't have that licensing or that permit that makes you a quote unquote legitimate business, then you are subject to $1,000 fines. And that was what we were doing up in the Bronx, was protesting that one of our members had received a fine of $2,050 for selling tacos, right? Which is something that everybody loves, right? Why would you fine somebody who's providing an essential service and who's keeping the streets happy, keeping the streets lively? So we wanted to amplify what's going on and unite our community and supporters as well to show that this can't continue. This is not a just recovery.
And such astronomical fines too. I mean, when you compare that to a ticket someone gets for parking at a fire hydrant, versus someone selling tacos, trying to make a living, doing an honest work, it's crazy. So we have a question. How did the pandemic affect on the ground reality for the vendors? Was the city government able to subsidize their livelihoods? Were vending employees able to stay afloat? Were they still on the streets during the pandemic, and were they able to stay COVID safe? So those are a bunch of questions there, but
yeah, really good questions. So the pandemic affected vendors in that, a lot of people weren't able to go out and work, just like any other small business or folks who were advised to quarantine, right? People weren't able to go out. And so that meant that they weren't having any income. For those who did go out, there was such a smaller amount of foot traffic because, again, people are quarantining, and rightly so, right? But that meant that people had very, very low income for a number of months. Most vendors that we work with had reported, about 90% of vendors had reported their sales were down between 60 to 90% throughout 2020, right? Since post-March 2020. And, unfortunately, though there were some programs out there for small businesses that were meant to support street vendors, right? Because of the licensing and permitting issue that has been in place for so long, it's made it so that vendors themselves were unable to prove that they were small business owners in order to get that relief. So vending employees, a lot of folks were laid off. There's also a lot of vendors are undocumented, because this is an opportunity where people can, with an ITIN number, can be a formalized business, right? But that meant they were excluded from other forms of relief. So it's been very difficult. People are really just trying to survive, and the city has made it extremely, extremely difficult. And now when we're in this moment where we want to be hopeful, right? Everyone wants to just go back to things being normal. Unfortunately, we're actually seeing an increase in fines on vendors.
That's crazy. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that info with us that I think a lot of people don't realize. And I mean, Max, part of, I think what your photographs have done is kind of drawn attention to these vendors. I mean, so many people in New York see the vendors and it's part of what they see, but they don't fully understand the stories and the regulations and the challenges that they face every day. So there is another question. What are ways that people can help vendors right now? That's a great question.
So that's a great question. How can people help vendors? One is by always going out to support, right? And chatting it up with vendors, just like Max was doing. Like, people are out for 12-hour days, and just have a good conversation, wear a mask, Tip, always carry cash. Those are great ways to support vendors in the day-to-day. And I think in changing the overall policies so that vendors can actually survive, not just on the day-to-day, but be a bit more comfortable and secure in their businesses. Folks can call their state assembly member or state senators to encourage them to sign on to a bill called S1175, which will eliminate the cap on the number of permits and licenses available. So just making it known, right? Like, you are a street vendor supporter, you care about vendors, and you think your elected officials should too. One last thing we can do, sorry to have one third one in here, but tomorrow on the Brian Lair show, I think it's at 11 a.m. Or 10, let me double check, but the mayor always joins, and this would be a great time to call into the show and ask, why did he go ahead and turn around on his word and put NYPD back into street vending?
That's great. Yep. So that's tomorrow, the Brian Lair show. Andrew often calls in to chat. Well, really to ask questions to the mayor, as we should.
Mm-hmm. I think it really falls under this thing, and like what we've seen through the pandemic, that like, you can't just like expect that these facets of New York City that we all love are just always going to be there. You need to be like active with your environment, and know that like, these communities need your support. You just can't just expect that they're always going to be there, and I think that's like more important now, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both. If there's any other questions or thoughts, please drop them in the chat. Carina, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all of that info and letting us know how we can get involved and help. Before we go, though, I do want to let everyone know, Max, about an upcoming show that you are a part of, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm going to be a part of this group gallery show in Brooklyn on the 31st, and it's going to be showcasing like several film photographers from this guy Matt Watson's YouTube series Off a Roll, and I'm super excited about it. It's like I haven't done something like this in a long time, and just looking forward to showing my work and seeing people in person, and just some nice energy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for those that can't make it there, or also that can make it, you should definitely pick up a copy of Max zine. Again, proceeds go to the Street Vendor Project. So that's another thing you can do, a small thing to help street vendors. So we'll, it's been dropped into the chat, and of course, Instagram and Twitter, right, Max, is a good way.
Yeah, and if you find me on Instagram and Twitter at New York City Vibe, spelled out, you'll see that my last post is like, you can see a little example of the zine, which I have right here. And the link in my bio on my Instagram is where you can buy the zine and buy a t-shirt or print, and all those net proceeds go to the Street Vendor Project.
Although all the soubrette swag went to your dad, so that's not available.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
Yeah. Love you, Mom and Dad, by the way. They're watching right now.
Yeah, this was really great. Thank you, both of you, Max, for showcasing these vendors, for your beautiful photography that is,
thank you,
speaks to sort of a greater thing here. And Carina, of course, thank you, and the whole team at Street Vendor Project, streetvendor.org, which has been dropped in to the chat, for all the work that you guys do every single day for the vendors.
No, back at you. It's a collaboration. All of us together are making this happen.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, we've got other virtual programs coming up this month, and join us in person when we will meet some of these street vendors and sample their food and learn more about the history and the regulations on the street. So hope to see you then. Enjoy your day, everyone. Thanks again.
Take care.
You too. Take care.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.